Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Hinkle. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. Just like every week, we are going to bring my teammate, my colleague, my partner in crime, Jean Marie Nevada, to get us started for today's conversation.
Hey, Jamie, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
It's going well. It's starting to get warm here in Southern California, so I'm in a pretty good mood. As you know, I'm basically a lizard. I'm afraid of the cold.
Yes, and I mentioned earlier I put on some bright colors today to try to trick spring into coming to Portland.
To summer it up. Well, we will see you in a little while, I suspect.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. My pronouns are she and her, or ella if you speak Spanish. And I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. And every single Thursday for the past year, we have gotten together to talk about something, to talk about a current event article, and have a little conversation. And we're always excited when you can participate. This week, we are back to the Equality Act. And if you're wondering why we keep going back to it, it's because we've been talking about it for 47 years in some form or another. And I think that probably means we still need to keep going until it passes. And so there was some really interesting new research that came out this week. So if you want to grab this week's article, you should go to straightforequality.org/discussion series, where you can download the article and the questions that we're going to be using for the conversation today. And the article came from NBC News. Dan Avery did an article that was titled 3/4 of Americans Support LGBTQ Non-Discrimination Laws. And if you look into the article, it explains that in a national survey, 76% of Americans said that they support laws that ban discrimination against people who are LGBTQ identified, including a majority of Democrats and Republicans, significant portions of people in different religious groups. I would like to call out 81% of Latino Catholics supported it. People in urban and suburban areas. It really crossed every possible line. And that's good news, because what we know is people still don't have non-discrimination protections. And yet getting people from supporting to actually doing is a different story. So this week, I get to do something special. I'm going to actually start the conversation with my team at PFLAG, the Learning and Inclusion team. So for that, I'm going to bring Jamie back in and bring in Mackenzie Hart, too. Hello, my friends. Hey, Mackenzie.
Hello.
How's life in New York?
Life in New York is good. Much like Southern California, it's finally warm out here, and I am loving every second of it.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. We just have to bring warm to Oregon, and Jamie will be set, and we'll all be good. So one of the things that we wanted to do today was talk about the Equality Act and talk about specifically this research, which is really fascinating from a learning and inclusion perspective. And how do we talk about this as people who wish to educate? And I think every single one of us has the opportunity to educate. And frankly, when you're talking about a bill that's been around this long that hasn't passed yet, it means we need more people out there educating. So let's head out to the first question. So the research really did go into how the majority of Americans across lots of different demographics really did support these non-discrimination protections. So with that in mind, why do you think that legislation like the Equality Act, which would provide those protections, has not become federal law? And actually, Jamie, I know this is one of your favorite topics in the world, so let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that I want to call out is that I think it's really interesting that not only across all of these different dimensions do you see majorities supporting non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ folks, but that's been true for at least a decade. I am almost certain that it is more than that, but I wrote my master's thesis about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act in 2010-ish. And in that document, I wrote about how majorities in all 50 states, in all faith communities, in sort of all political parties supported these non-discrimination protections, but we still weren't seeing movement at the federal level. I think it's important to call out that the Bostock decision from last summer has provided the protections that would have been covered in the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, but not everything that would be included in the Equality Act. So that's good news, and we have seen some progress. But I just wanted to really quickly call that out. The second thing that I think is sort of lacking when you look at public opinion data like this is that it is unable to capture the intensity with which people feel about these issues. You know, it might be that they support non-discrimination protections for people who are LGBTQ, but Is it going to change the way they vote in the next election? Is it going to change the way that they are sort of participating in the political process? That isn't captured by a poll like this. So I wanted to make note of that. And then the very last thing that really sort of strikes me when we talk about this sort of data, when we talk about this sort of information, is that I think there are lots of different ways in the work that we do through the Straight for Equality in the Workplace program that we see the ways that theoretically people are really interested in showing respect, in supporting non-discrimination policies, in making spaces where people are able to be out. But when you actually get it down on paper, it's a little bit more complex. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. You know, the research that we were looking at says more than 3/4 of Americans support non-discrimination policies, but only about 70% support the Equality Act when you look at public opinion data. And there's some nuance there. There's some disconnect that we don't often talk about, which is like, theoretically, I want to be a good person. I don't want anybody to experience discrimination. I want everybody to be treated the same. But when it's down on paper and it could potentially impact the funding that my kids' school get, it becomes a different conversation.
Yeah.
So that was just those are three things that came to mind, and I clearly like to talk about this.
People should know that if Jamie could have a favorite law, this would probably be it, in the same way that I would be in a relationship with Title IX. You know, Jamie, when you're saying that, it reminds me a little bit of that HRC workplace research that says that a huge portion of people who are not LGBTQ think everybody should be able to be out at work. And yet a significant portion of that same group say, but when you talk about it, I see you as unprofessional. So it's sort of a theoretical acceptance to an actual material acceptance. Mackenzie, what do you think is going on in this case?
I think there's a lot going on, and I think Jamie touched on a lot of it really, really incredibly. But I think that one thing that I kind of think of that is not as optimistic. This is a great poll. It shows that people are very willing, or at least in concept, supportive of progress. But what I also see in this poll is that almost 20% of people in this country are against this. That's what the poll is finding. And I don't think that's the biggest story, but I do think what that shows, and kind of along the lines of what Jamie was saying about intensity of opinion, is that that minority of Americans might be very intensely against the Equality Act and against non-discrimination protections. And what that means is that there is a group of people who are doing a lot of work to create misinformation, to confuse people who are in the majority here, who do want to support non-discrimination ordinances, but kind of muddying the waters and saying, you know what, well, the Equality Act will do this. And some are lies, some are just to create confusion, some just outright hateful. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, that even though we do have a majority, and I do think that should be the focus from a learning and inclusion standpoint, it's so vital to know that there is an opposition, and they are an organized opposition that are putting work in, and we need to be aware of what they are doing so that we can counter what they are saying and be sure that we are spreading the truth about the Equality Act. And once we are able to do that, we're going to be able to continue changing hearts and minds to get people who want to be good people, who want to support people having equal rights, to get them on board with the policies that are actually going to do what they believe in. And I think that's just an incredibly important thing to keep in mind.
I'm actually glad that you brought up the opposition point. I think that it's something that when you look at numbers like this, you think, well, so many people are supportive. Obviously, this is a done deal, and it is so very far from a done deal, and it has been for a really long time. And it is because of a very well-funded, well-organized, and effectively misleading opposition that we have, who quite frankly makes up lies on a regular basis. It's like a lie machine. If they were specializing in lies, they'd be experts. And I'm about to cross a line. I can feel it coming. So let me go to the next question before I get in a whole lot of trouble and you find somebody else hosting this next week. So we want to talk a little bit about the education point, which is actually why I have the two of you here. So when you find yourself in conversations with people who clearly believe that people are already already protected, what do you do? And I want to kind of lead with a little bit of my own example on this. So back when the world was functional, I used to spend a lot of time doing training in workplaces, and I would get to this point where I would show people a map of the United States, and I would say, here's all the places where you can still be discriminated against because you are LGBTQ identified. And first people would shake their heads no and say this couldn't exist. And then jaws would drop and eyes would get really, really wide. So what I discovered was that one of the best ways for me to do things was actually visual aids and actually trying to communicate some of this, because there is something incredibly shocking and un-American about seeing this very spotty map. And obviously Jamie referred to Bostock, so that's been resolved now. But that map is still true in the majority of people's experiences. So Mackenzie, let's talk a little bit about what your arguments are and how you handle this conversation, because education is a huge piece of it.
Absolutely. And one of the best tools that I've found with education, particularly around these issues, is storytelling. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has many friends with their own stories. And stories are absolutely vital because they allow you to emotionally connect with the people that you're talking to and immediately kind of show them that their assumptions have been wrong. That you can say, oh, you know what? No, that's not true. I was fired for this because I shared this identity, or, oh, I was excluded from this program or from this facility or public accommodation because of an LGBTQ identity I share. And then not only is that just, saying a fact, you can always say, well, this percentage of people have been fired in some way. And there might be kind of a vague response of people being able to say, well, maybe they did something to deserve it, or maybe it wasn't that, maybe it was something else. When you get to tell your own story, or you have stories that you can tell, people will then say, well, you know what, maybe I didn't understand this issue before, but I know that my friend Mackenzie went through something horrible, or my family member went through this, or this person's child went through something horrendous like this. And that allows them to immediately see that, oh no, this is a real problem, not only just on paper, not only is it something that's going on, but it's going on with people that they care about, people that they have connected to. Yeah. And then one other thing that is able to do is that it allows you to frame the discussion around your experiences. That even as they go forward, if they're going to talk about these issues with other people, they'll be able to say, well, I met someone named Mackenzie who told their story here, and be able to retell that story and have that connection. And they might be more willing to, stand up because they know you and they know something that you went through, and then understand why it's important to pursue it. And that allows as well to kind of stand against the opposition, because now it's your emotional, personal message that is framing the discussion rather than just misinformation that's coming from an anti-LGBTQ opposition group. And so that's a really, really exciting, personal, fantastic way to kind of get to prove some things wrong, as well as to give next steps forward on why the Equality Act and other LGBTQ inclusive policies are so vital.
I love that. I love that. It's like you've been with PFLAG forever, Mackenzie. The tell your story mantra that all of us walk around repeating over and over and over again, but it's totally true. Jamie, tell us a little bit about what's worked for you when it comes to doing this education.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the both of you that those visual aids are game changers, and that personal stories are a way to create that personal connection. And I'm also just going to call out, if anybody was looking for personal stories to help themselves understand this issue a little bit better, the PFLAG Story Bank is a good place to start. There's also a really fantastic resource called Faces of Freedom. If you just Googled Faces of Freedom, it's a website that aggregates stories from a number of LGBTQ advocacy organizations that speak to these topics. So I just wanted to make those two recommendations really quick. But for me personally, I am somebody who most definitely fact bombs. Like, I'm the numbers person. I'm going to start rolling off data at you. I'm gonna point you to the most recent Williams Institute piece or Center for American Progress piece, because for me, that is one of the things that has the greatest impact on my opinions about particular issues. And so it's where you can sort of hear or see my passion about the issue. So I am most definitely a fact bomber when it comes to somebody being like, that can't possibly be true. No way.
You're not making that up. If I ever need anything, I just send an IM to you that says, I need a statistic on, and fill in the blank, and you send me my bombs, and it's like the best experience ever.
Yeah, that is definitely where I sit in this conversation.
We all bring something. I bring the pictures, Mackenzie brings the stories, and you bring the fact bomb. we've talked a little bit about how to communicate around this, and now I actually want to bring in a real life adult to help us. So we have a special guest who is coming back to the show to help talk about the Equality Act for a little bit more, and that is our colleague Diego Sanchez, PFLAG National's Director of Advocacy, Policy, and Partnerships, who is probably here to tell me when I'm not allowed to say anymore. But sorry if I crossed the line, Diego.
I'm just waiting for the adult person to arrive. I don't know if Liz can make more room on the screen.
So, Diego, thank you for coming back to talk about this with us. Could you give people a quick update? Have there been any updates on what's been happening with the Equality Act or related legislation?
Absolutely. Well, the one of the more exciting things is that we're all in this together, and that the fact of the Equality Act being so ready and so present, that we have a president who's ready to sign it, leadership under David Cicilline, Congressman Cicilline, that drove it through the House along with Speaker Pelosi, and it's sitting with the Senate. And we get to focus on one chamber of commerce with the power of our zip codes, our stories, talking to our senators about why we and our friends deserve equality. One of those opportunities is going to be on April 21st, which is Lobby Day. And it's not just ours. PFLAG National is part of an overall coalition, a campaign to drive forward the Equality Act and get it done. That April 21st includes speaking with legislators, with senators from every zip code, every state, all 50 of them, and letting them know why we need the Equality Act, why it affects ourselves and our families. And this April 21st is a big day for us. In advance of that, we've been doing things like phone banking along with the NEAT. That's very easy to use and easy to set up. And Jamie shared some links, but they're also going to our website. You'll see them all as well. But moving forward from the wonderful hearing that we had in the Senate with our own board member, Edith Guffey, being one of 5 people to talk who is not a legislator, and being one of 3 people who spoke in favor of the Equality Act. We're now ready for the Senate to take action, and we're here to make the move.
Diego, I want to ask you a question that a lot of people often have, and they sort of, I think, kind of get wrong on this, which is, if you are somebody who lives in a district or in a place where your legislators are already supportive, should you be participating in Lobby Day?
Thank you for asking that. And the answer is absolutely yes. We all have done nice things for people. We've all done good things that are right to do, that help people. One of the things when we do that is we don't mind hearing the words thank you. That is something we should go and do. We should go back to the House of Representatives and thank our members of Congress for moving this through the House. And we should definitely go to our senators, both those who are co-sponsors already and those who are inclined to support, and thank them for that support, number one. And number two, ask them please to use the power of their place by speaking with their colleagues who may not be convinced yet. Let them know some stories that convince them, some lives they know that would be affected or have already been affected negatively in the absence of the Equality Act. But yes, thank the senators who have supported us, and definitely urge the ones who have not to get on board.
In my old press secretary days, we refer to that as the thank and spank.
Well, I'm an Oregon voter. One of my senators is the introducing sponsor of the Equality Act in the Senate in past sessions, and I'm participating in Lobby Day. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to sit with either the senator or somebody from his staff to just say, as one of your constituents, I am so grateful. It is so amazing to be able to vote for you year after year, because this is something that I'm very intensely passionate about. So.
Well, it's so key. Think about your state. I mean, the thing about Senator Merkley, and Senator Wyden is phenomenal as well, but Senator Merkley actually was selected by Senator Kennedy as he was dying to take over equality. and to lead us. And it wasn't a far jump. He chose Senator Merkley because Merkley actually, when he was in charge of his state, of your state, he made that real in the state as governor. So he had a history of equality, and Senator Kennedy asked him to bring it forward, and he's done so dynamically.
And so I wanted to clarify one thing. So for anyone who's joining or might be joining a little bit late, this lobby day is completely virtual. So you do not need to be in DC to do it. But there actually was a really specific DC question, Diego, which is, what about people who reside in DC? Any suggestions for them on lobby day?
Absolutely, yes. If you have friends who live anywhere, find them. Call up your alumni network. Call up, if you have an alumni network, call up your faith network, call up people that are your friends who live elsewhere, as well as your family members, and remind them that everyone needs support right now, and everyone with a voice matters. People in DC, fortunately, can also reach other people. No one is doing anything in person, so anyone living anywhere is not missing out on walking into the Capitol right now. We're all doing everything virtually. But yes, people in DC, get to your networks and ask them please to engage on our behalf.
Thank you. Diego, I want to ask you, I mean, we're primarily talking about Equality Act today, but I actually want to ask you about some of the stuff that's happening in states. Specifically, a lot of people saw the headlines that came out of Arkansas this week, and the bill that was, well, not signed, and then the legislature overturned the governor's veto. Could you talk a little bit first about what happened there and sort of what people should be watching out for next?
Absolutely. And I want to couch that by saying we know that people in many states, 33 states actually, are facing anti-trans bills, one of three types, either denying trans or non-binary people medical interventions, or not playing sports, being disallowed from playing sports in accord with their gender identity. And then the other that's also important but underplayed, which is the one about identity documents. Not being able to change your birth certificate, which then affects wherever you live, wherever you were born, you're stuck with that. So every state being able to do that, to change those identity documents, is key. What happened in Arkansas is so key. And thank you for asking about that, Jean Marie. What happened was, it was a terrible bill about medical coverage. Like, you can't get medical treatment if you're trans. If you are a parent of a trans person, you cannot allow that. It is criminal. And if you are a medical provider, you cannot prescribe medications. That is illegal. I'll tell you the bad news and then the good news. Bad, good, bad, good. So bad is that it went through the legislature, House and Senate. It went to the governor's desk. Good, Governor Hutchinson actually had finally agreed to meet with trans families. And while our director of comms doesn't always take credit for the incredible things she does, she actually went after him in a very PFLAG friendly way, inviting him to meet with trans families so that he could know what it is that he was speaking so poorly about. He put it off for a couple weeks. Liz never let go and stayed on it. He eventually agreed to meet with families with transgender people. And then as a result of that, he vetoed that bill that hit his desk. We know that a year ago or even 2 months ago, he might have signed that thing. He would have signed it. But because he had meetings with people in his state, he was compelled to hear our story, but not only hear our story, but say our stories. When you look at the quotes that he gave after his veto, he clearly met with people who affected him, whose lives he cared about. And, I'm not even going to say the word suddenly because it probably wasn't sudden, but I'm going to say courageously that he stood up. Not everybody will say they were wrong. He essentially did with his own words. Then the third thing, the bad, was that the House and Senate both overrode him because they only needed a simple majority, one person over 50%, and it is overridden, and it was done in both chambers. The good news on the other side of that is that The ACLU is working hard to prepare a proper POW. We're anti-violence at PFLAG, but POW is an okay word for a lawsuit that comes after a bad thing. And the other is that there are 90 days after the close of the legislature for that law to become effective. So there's a 90-day period in which we're certainly going to seek a stay on that ruling. Try not to let it be effective. And also PFLAG and others are going to come together to create safety zones for the families who may be affected. The thing about PFLAG is we're in every state. We have families in every state who care. And so Arkansas families need to know that everyone around the country has got their back. And there are plenty of neighboring states that we want to make sure that their people are going to be safe in, regardless of the outcome. But in the interim, we expect that thing to be held down.
And you know, that's one of the things I love about being a PFLAGger. No matter what state you go into, you know you have family somewhere because you're part of PFLAG. And Mackenzie, this really speaks to what you were saying about the whole story thing. So I think your point really got proven. We have one more question. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I think it's a really interesting one, Diego. And this is, when the Equality Act passes, what effect will it have, if any, on these anti-trans bills that are passing, or not even passing, but that are being introduced? I mean, will it tamp any of them down? Does it have an effect?
The answer is yes, because federal law supersedes state law. And that once you have a bill, a law in place, and we will have a law when the Equality Act passes, the president is ready to sign it. I'm sure he's got the whole row of pens already to put like one letter at a time as they do. But we have an administration ready to move this. State bills cannot override federal law. And so we are looking to save an awful lot of states as we move forward federally.
Excellent, excellent. So once again, I'm actually going to pick on Jamie one more time. Jamie, go through all of the data that people need to know about their next steps on taking action on the Equality Act. What are the websites? What are the dates? Everything. Go and data bomb people, please. Mute.
I was muted. Hooray!
Very
Yes, if you were looking to take action, if you were looking to get involved, if you would like to participate in Lobby Day, my first recommendation is going to be pflag.org/taking action toolkit, which is the toolkit that we created after our webinar last month. It has lots of the different resources that Diego was talking about. I would also recommend that you check out pflag.org/protect trans kids if you are interested in those 33 states where people are introducing anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ legislation at the state level. So those are my top two if you're looking to take action right away. And if you're looking for those personal stories, if you're looking to connect in that way, Faces of Freedom is amongst my favorite.
Excellent. And Mackenzie, do you have any suggestions for people if they are looking for any information on how to get a little bit better on their stories? Because that is something that you definitely talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most important thing is to practice. Practice your stories ahead of time. We recommend around 90 seconds to 2 minutes. It's the amount of time that people usually have attention. I believe that if you are a PFLAGger, you may have access to our storytelling training. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jean Marie.
You were right.
Awesome. There's an amazing PFLAG storytelling training that can kind of walk you through the bits and pieces on how to craft your story. And then after that, just look in a mirror, tell your story multiple times, practice your jokes ahead of time if you're going to tell any. Don't wing it on the spot the way that I do. Just practice it ahead of time and then get out there and start telling people your story and start changing the world one story at a time.
I love that. Diego, we have a minute left. Give your last big pitch for the Equality Act and for people to do something.
I just want people to remember the power of their zip code, that your zip code matters just as much as your family story. Often when we tell stories, we fail to recognize the power of our own story. We think that our family's plight is much smaller than anyone else's, that this negative thing that happened or could happen is not as important as somebody else's story I can tell. Telling your story to your legislator or your media representatives not repeating negative things, but telling your story is the most powerful thing you can do. And I just have to say, if it can work on Governor Asa Huntington, then it can work on just about anybody. We have done it in PFLAG quietly for nearly 50 years. This is a time we're doing it vociferously, and we need everyone to use every ounce of their energy, because this is our shot. And we've got to make sure that we're working on that Equality Act movement. But just to say that with the more than 120 negative state bills out there against LGBTQ people, more than 100 of those are anti-trans or non-binary bills. So every act toward equality feeds the next, and we need to make sure the proper engine is fed with fuel.
Every act towards equality feeds the next. I think that's where we leave off this week. Diego, Mackenzie, Jamie, thank you so much for being back here this week. We will keep talking about the Equality Act until it passes, so expect more of this. As we wrap up the same way every single week, we remind you to run fast, to laugh hard, and to be kind. Please continue being very safe. Wear your masks. When it's your turn, go get your vaccination, so that way we can all see each other and give each other big hugs sometime really soon. Make sure you register for that lobby day on April 21st. And until then, we will be back next week with more Something to Talk About Live. Have a good week, everybody.